Hi, everyone. This is my presentation on the photograph Burst of Joy by Sal Vader. So just an overview, this photograph won the 1974 Pulitzer Prize in feature photography. It was taken during Operation Homecoming and after the Paris Peace Accords, where prisoner of wars were coming home from Vietnam and the US was ending its involvement there. So at the end of the war, it was published by the Associated Press, and according to the Smithsonian Magazine, it remains the quintessential homecoming photograph of the time. So just a little about the photographer. His name was Slava Sal Vader. He was born in Berkeley, California in 1926 and graduated from Sacramento State. And he began his career actually as a sports writer for the Richmond Independent and then became an editor for the Tulsa World and several other papers through 1961. So he didn't really have a background as a war photographer or really a photographer in general. However, in 1961, he transferred to work for the Associated Press in California and started to work in photography. And that was where he would take Burst of Joy. And he spent much of the Vietnam War covering anti-war demonstrations in San Francisco and Berkeley. And he did travel to Vietnam to take some war photographs, but never saw combat action there. And here's a quote from Vader. He said, "When I worked for the Associated Press, I did pretty much everything from the 1964 Alaska earthquake to mining disasters, boxing matches, football games, and space shots. It was wonderful, but I saw a lot of tragedy. I twice went out to war in Vietnam. I never really saw combat, but it was pretty hectic." So I just wanted to include this quote to show kind of how Vader's background was not really in war photography, but was in it was very diverse in what he was covering, and kind of these things that he had a background in, boxing matches, football games, were things maybe to appeal more to the civilian population and what the people of the United States wanted to see. And I think that perspective went into taking Burst of Joy as well. So background on the photograph, it was taken March 17th, 1973 at Travis Air Force Base. 20 prisoner of wars were returning to 400 family members that were there to greet them. So it was a huge event. And Vader and Walt Zabowski were working out of the women's bathroom. Zabowski was another AP photographer, and so they had these makeshift conditions to process these photographs. Additionally, there were anywhere from 20 to 40 photographers there to take the pictures. So there was a lot of competition on getting these photographs published of this return. And out of the corner of his eye, Vader saw this family reuniting, and so turned and started snapping the photographs. And he rushed to the women's bathroom to process these photographs, and then 6 pictures of the scene had been developed within 30 minutes, including Burst of Joy. And here's a little video about the story.
I think the picture that I took summarized probably more completely than others the feeling of the nation of having the soldier coming home after being in prison for so many years at Travis Air Force Base when we shot this picture of returning POWs, and there was a lot of emotion involved. I was shooting some of the crowd and some of the people, and I turned away when Sturm had come down. I saw him walk down and he talked, and then he started to walk off the podium. So I turned and I was shooting something just behind me, and we're working in a bullpen of, I don't know how many photographers there. There was a lot of television, a lot of stills. I would say probably anywhere from 20 to 30, maybe 40 photographers. And I was turned away, and all of a sudden I saw something out of the corner of my eye, just a little movement. And it was just totally an automatic reaction. It was a burst of about 6 frames. Really what makes that image is that he is quite rigid and quite military, and is very formal coming off the plane. And the contrast to that is his family running toward him.
So just a little about the subject of the photograph, Robert Sturm. He was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and he was a pilot. And on October 27th, 1967, he was shot down over Hanoi while on a mission. And from 1967 to 1973, he spent 6 years in North Vietnamese prison camps, including the Hoa Lo prison, where he endured starvation, illness, solitary confinement, just the brutal conditions endured by prisoners of war during this war. And he shared a cell with U.S. Senator John McCain, which I thought was interesting while he was in prison in North Vietnam. And it, Sturm ended up being one of the 591 prisoner of wars released during Operation Homecoming. And he was released 3 days before the scene of Burst of Joy on March 14th. And so the story, Sturm made a brief speech at Travis Air Force Base on behalf of all the returning prisoners of war. And then he turned to rush to his family. And in the photograph, you'll see kind of from left to right, his 15-year-old daughter, Lori, is the one reaching out to hug him, followed by his son, Robert Jr., another daughter, Sydney, his wife, Loretta, and his last son, Robert. So you can see the joy on their faces as they meet to greet him, rush to greet him, and how they're just so happy and excited to embrace him. And one quote from Lori Sturm, she says, "We didn't know if he would ever come home. That moment was all our prayers answered, all our wishes come true." So this was just really a huge moment for the Sturm family after so long of not seeing their father. The story of the image ended up not being so happy. However, 3 days before the reunion, Loretta Sturm had actually asked Robert for a divorce, and the couple tried to work out the marriage, but divorced within a year, and the case ended up being taken to court, and Sturm lost custody of his youngest children. So it's a story behind it. He didn't end up coming back into his family's life as it looked like he was going to in the image. And Sturm did end up remarrying, but he divorced again and just struggled to fit back into his family's lives. Lori Sturm actually mentioned that they struggled to accept his authority after just being gone as an authority figure for so long, and he kind of struggled with that as well. And just as a side note, all 4 children hang Burst of Joy in their homes, but Sturm does not because of how painful the image was. So this kind of just shows how the happiness of what was depicted in the image was kind of much more complex and a very difficult situation for this returning POW. And some public reactions. The American public generally viewed this as a just joyous end to the Vietnam War, ending on a high note after such a divisive conflict. For the perspective of U.S. Veterans, one veteran, Donald Goldstein, who was also an Air Force pilot, said, "It's a hero's welcome for guys who weren't always seen or treated as heroes." So this kind of idea that, after such a dividing war where the U.S. military was put in such a negative light, this kind of gave them a high note to end the war, that they could be treated well and return to their families. Overall, I mean, this symbolized the end of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. So the anti-war movement viewed this as a representation of its success, that it was able to end the war and bring these soldiers home, these men home. And just overall, the photograph was viewed in a positive light, that the U.S. could heal and return to normal life after the end of this dividing war. The only person who did not really receive this photograph well was Sturm himself, because of the pain of that he went to war and lost his family, which I think is interesting, that despite the fact that this image is so optimistic and positive, the subject of the image views it negatively. And significance and legacy, the photograph is viewed really that a representation that war will end, that people can be returned to their families. It also shows the resilience in war when people are trying to get back to something. So Sturm was trying to get back to his family and his children, and he endured all these conditions to do that. This photo also shows the possibility of healing and reunion. So this divided family is finally reuniting, I think can represent the possibility that the nation, which is also so divided and split for so long, could also heal. But conversely, the story behind the photo, I mean, shows this difficulty of returning to pre-war life, and that really not all casualties of war occur on the battlefield, and that war is fought really for a long time by these, veterans, and especially prisoners of wars that return to this different life than they had before the war. And also, Lori Sturm mentions that seeing this photograph serves as a memory to her of the families who weren't reunited, and how fortunate a family like hers was to receive this blessing of being reunited. And so I think that kind of shows another aspect of the complexity of the happiness of this image. So here are my references, and thank you for watching my presentation.